your mix sounds good one week and then not so good the next week, you're in the same room using the same gear. This usually isn't a skills issue, this is more of a systems issue. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Audio exposes problems a lot faster, not because people are bad at doing what they do when they're mixing. Although, yes, there may be some training that need to be involved or added to enhance or increase their skills. But to really get to the heart of the issue, you have to fix the systems issue. And so audio is very unforgiving. And that's one of the things that people really have to understand. It doesn't hide anything from you, especially when you're listening to a live stream version or a broadcast version of an audio. There are a few things that come into play that may create the systems problem. And these are a couple of things that you have to look at. If you have a team of rotating volunteers, so you have a different person, they're listening different, they're hearing different, they have a different idea of what they want to achieve. You have different starting points every week because the person that missed last week may have had more bass, may have had more snare, less vocals. The person that's missing this week may be focused on a clean sound, but may be missing the foundation of those low end items. What's happening here is that you don't have a baseline or a default scene that kind of helps you restart from week to week. So regardless of where this person ended, we can come in from week to week and start at the same base level and remind your engineers, your volunteers, say, hey, this is where we have agreed to be our baseline standard. We want to start here every time. And so it kind of resets things and it kind of reminds your volunteers that this is where we want to start. This is where we want things to live on a regular basis. So we want to kind of eliminate the issue of everybody starting different, eliminate the issue of consistency not even being possible on the front end of things. So this is where creating those baselines will help. Another thing that happens is gain structure is just set by feel. It's not set by a real healthy standard. And people are confusing volume versus a healthy level of gain. And so and then also distinguishing the difference between trim versus digital gain. Like these are two different things. So we want to make sure that people understand the terminologies, making sure people understand where things should be set properly based off of not just, I feel that this should be set here. And there's some feeling that comes involved at the end of the day in your mixing. But when we're talking about on a systems level, there are some baseline standards that we need to accomplish and agree on so that we can develop that consistency. There's a few other things that happen as well when you don't set your trim or gain your gain structure is improperly set. If you don't get things set right on the front end, you're gonna have problems later on the back end. Your compression is gonna create problems. Your EQ is gonna create problems. It's kind of the same way that I like to tell people when you're mixing in general. If you have a bad source coming in, you're gonna get a bad source going out. Now, the difference that the baseline and the systems help with that is if you have a bad source coming in, but your systems are set well, it may be a bad source coming out, but at least it's clean and consistent. And that's what we want to accomplish. You may not be able to fix a bad vocalist. You may not be able to fix a musician that may not be as skilled as someone else, but you can at least make sure that there's a baseline of consistency. And that's what our goal is. Another thing you have to consider as well is the room. Rooms are very unforgiving. Empty room is not the same thing as a full room. So you may mix something during a practice or a rehearsal, but on Sunday, it can be a completely different sound because there are more people in the room or, any type of, not just Sunday, but any type of production environment. So those are things you have to keep in mind when you're doing a practice or rehearsal. So you're mixing based off of perception. So you have to make sure that like, I am not just listening to what's happening in this room right now. I need to listen to what's going to happen to and consider what's going to happen when this room has more people in it, when things get shifted a little bit, when people move around a little bit different. Those things you have to consider. You can't just take based off of the space that you're in right now. There's typically no reference tracks that people use when you're talking about sound checks and things like that. Having a reference track is a really good way to kind of balance things out in the space, to know where things are going to sit and where things need to sit. Um, and again, I want to reiterate: the room is not honest with you. The room does not tell you everything that is actually happening, especially when there's no people in it versus when this is a full room. And so it may sound convincing. You may, oh man, this is good. This is where I want to live. Until the dynamics of that space change, and now you have to approach it from a different perspective. So these are things you have to keep in mind um, every time you're mixing in a practice room versus a real practical situation. Um, and here's something you should consider in terms of having a practical reset of how to approach improving these systems. And typically, no new gear is required when you're trying to establish and figure out what is your baseline. You typically will be able to fix this by creating a default scene, as I said earlier, having a standard of this is where things need to live. One of the things that really helps is deciding this is where I want the band to live, this is where I want the vocals to live, and the best way on a general level to approach that is to actually decide where you want the vocals to live first, because that's you want people to hear and interpret what's going on clearly, and everything else sits under that. If you set the band first and then try to fit the vocals in, then you're gonna have a hard time competing with that, because you're like, man, I really want the band to sit here. I really want the band to feel right in this space, and now you're trying to make something fit in a structure that's improperly set and not prioritized properly. Um, Again, standard gain structure. You have to decide like where do we want our input levels to sit, and also the as far as like the ratio of what's being sent in and how it's being sent in. You want to decide how those things are properly set consistently. And the truth of the matter is, if you get your gain structure set on the front end, you don't have to adjust this on a regular basis in situations where you're mixing the same band in the same space from week to week. Your gain structure shouldn't change too much unless you're dealing with different vocalists, different instrumentalists. And so in that situation, you can potentially set up different scenes for those different groups of people. And so those are things you have to consider when it comes to consistent gain structures and setting that up properly. Have a few different reference tracks, because you may have one that may not give you everything you need. So it's good to have a variety of reference tracks that can give you an idea of what's going to happen if I have something that is because sometimes you're dealing with different genres of music in your environment, so you want to make sure you can accommodate all of those various elements that may occur. Something that may have a little bit more low end versus something that may be just like straight clean. And you're talking about gospel versus CCM, where you may do a mixture of both of those two. So you want to have reference tracks that can accommodate for those two different situations. You need to document the basics. This is one of the things that I had a problem with on the front end of getting into this space, because for me it's kind of like these things come natural. Why do I need to document it? Well, when you start working with other people and you have volunteers going in and out on rotating type structure, you want to make sure that things are documented so that people understand what has been happening, why things happen the way they happen, and they don't have to continuously ask these questions. They have documentation to support what's happening, to help them understand what's happening. But it's also a good reminder to look at the documentation to remind you, just like the setting up the scenes and being able to recall that, to remind you this is where we want to be. This is the baseline level. Another thing is just I want to remind you that your team isn't bad. Again, there may be some training involved that are necessary to help you improve and enhance in some areas. But the real problem more often is that systems aren't helping enough and they need to be fixed. That's where your focus should start. Before fixing people, please, please fix your systems. And I can guarantee you, if you fix your systems, it's actually going to help your people and it's going to attract more volunteers. It's going to attract more people to want to be involved with what you're doing because your systems will be attractive. It's just like being on a some type of athletic team or being in a band. Good musicians attract good musicians. Good players attract other good players. So if you have a system that is working well, it's going to attract people to want to be involved and be a part of that system. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I want you to comment. Tell me, like, what is your biggest struggle right now? Are you having problems with balancing your vocalist, balancing your band? If you're having problems with consistency, just drop it in the comments. I want to be able to help you in any way that I can to answer these questions and to point you in the right place on fixing your systems.